You're watching Brazos Valley This Morning on KBTX News 3.
It's become one of the most controversial topics of the day. You've got some politicians, pundits, policymakers trying to persuade Americans that during the current COVID-19 pandemic that we either must stay in lockdown conditions until the health risks have subsided, and then others say we need to fully reopen America so as not to destroy our economy. A new study from researchers at Texas A&M is revealing how Texans really feel about the entire COVID-19 reopening process. We're joined by the leading researcher on that study, Marco Palma. Dr. Palma from the Texas A&M Human Behavior Laboratory. Thanks so much for being here. Dr. Palma, first, you did a real experiment with real people. How did you do that experiment?
So we conducted an online experiment in the United States. Essentially, we wanted to look at the public views for the trade-off or the perceived trade-off between income and health. And so what we did is we gave people the option to contribute monetarily to two charities. And these charities would provide support to either health by providing personal protective equipment, or to provide income that goes directly into the pockets of people who have lost their jobs. In doing so, essentially what we're asking is, we're not really just looking after what people's public support is, but we want to know what they do when there's money on the line.
And this was real money that you were saying these people could donate. I mean, you were handing them real dollars essentially and saying, hey, donate it to one of these two nonprofits. What did you find? Was there one that they gave more to?
So there was more support for the health component, but surprisingly, the difference was not very large. So we had about 56% support for health compared to 44% support to the income cost. And if you look at the proportion of people and how much they gave, the large majority of participants gave to both causes combined. There was only a very minor fraction of people who gave exclusively to either the income or the health cause.
Okay, so fairly even just in the overall picture. Did you find any specific variables among these people and the demographics of them and how that potentially informed their decisions?
This is something very interesting because we actually do not find a lot of differences that change that gap that favors the health dimension. We look at political affiliation, we look at age, we look at income, and many different other variables, and that difference seems to be pretty robust. So there was not a big difference in terms of that. There were some differences, however, when it came to the question as to how long people are willing to stay home in lockdown to try to control the epidemic.
What differences did you find there?
So here, what we found was that in general, we observed about a 60 days was the median support for staying at home lockdown. Beyond that, this is an important number because it shows that anything above 60 days, essentially, you start to lose over half of support for this type of measures. Now, this is important because both the health and the income component are forms of public goods, which means that everybody benefits from them, but their success depends on having a critical mass of people supporting them. On the one hand, if we do not have enough personal protective equipment, we would probably be not safe in terms of the medical equipment and the general public. But also, if people do not have enough income to stay at home, their capacity to really stay in lockdown is substantially diminished.
So you're saying that income variations tended to inform or at least correlate with how long people were willing to stay home?
That's exactly right, with lower income respondents being less likely or having shorter period times that they are willing to stay at home, presumably because they do not have enough of a safety net, and so they need to come out and find a source of income.
And then did you find any differences in political affiliation and how that informed whether respondents were willing to stay at home for longer?
Yes, we did. For staying at home, we found some differences in terms of political affiliations, and mainly what we found here is that people who tend to be pro-Republican had a much shorter time span for tolerating these type of lockdown measures.
So we've heard you talk about these big results that you found here. I'm curious, what was the most surprising finding to you from this study?
So I think what we did not anticipate was that this support for both causes was so close and so similar. We have seen a report coming out of the 32 previous economic advisors to presidents, and they said in a very crucial way that the economy and public health are not necessarily in combat here, that they're not necessarily two separate things, but that they're two complementary situations. And so we were wondering whether the public will also see these not necessarily as two completely independent views, but will recognize that these two measures, these two causes are interdependent.
So what do we do with this information? The Human Behavior Lab, you study human behavior, but you guys are also about results and about putting and about informing actions. What can we do with what we've learned from you today?
So some of the information they're providing will give some guidance, for example, for public policy related to how to enact some of these lockdown measures and what are some of the public sentiments related for those. So when you start to see protests and people demanding that they want the economy to be reopened, it gives you an idea of what's the actual proportion of people that are suffering and why. So you can better accommodate potentially by different geographical locations and by trying to get the aid where it's most needed.
Dr. Palma, real quick, did you find any changes in responses based on the age of the respondent?
So there was only a very marginal change, but it wasn't really big. So when you look at the number of days that people were willing to stay, I think there was 5 days longer for people who were 65 or older, but it wasn't really that big of a change compared to the general population.
Okay. Dr. Marco Palma, he's the director of the Human Behavior Laboratory at Texas A&M, leading researcher on this fascinating study about the way Texans are responding to stay-at-home orders and how they're feeling about essentially this whole situation. Dr. Palma, thank you so much for your work and for joining us here today.
Oh, thanks for having me.